Shalom, welcome to the Temple Institute. Once again, it's very, very hot in Israel. We have sharav weather, and we've been suffering through it for about 2 to 3 weeks now. But then again, it is sunny, so that is a blessing. I wanted to just update you on the shofar blowing on Shabbat, which is going to happen this week. And as we mentioned before, that according to halacha, we can do it on Har HaBayit. We can blow shofar on Har HaBayit according to the halacha. And also in the areas that surround Jerusalem in general, in the Old City. In reality, really, according to halacha, we can do it in any Beit Din. And in fact, that's what's going to happen this year. Unfortunately, we still didn't receive the okay from the police or the government of Israel to blow on Har HaBayit on the Temple Mount. But we will be blowing in at least 3 different minyanim in the Old City. That's Rav Ariel assured me. And one of them will be in the Temple Institute itself. And they will do it in front of the Beit Din that they have there. So we look forward to that. I don't know if I'll experience the sound of the shofar personally, but we all should at least open up our ears to try to hear the kol shofar, the sound of the shofar that will emanate from the holy city of Jerusalem this Rosh Hashanah. And now I'd like to give the answer to last week's riddle, just to remind those that weren't listening or didn't get a chance to listen. Last week's riddle was, what was the difference, or what is the difference between the Ketoret, the incense offering that's brought on a daily basis, twice a day, in the Heichal? In the Heichal is the outside area, is actually the inside area of the Beit HaMikdash, but it's outside of the Holy of Holies, and it's brought on the golden Mizbeach, on the golden altar, and the incense that's brought in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. The answer is, and I said it, the answer would be found in the Psukim. And let me quote you the 2 Psukim. There's one Pasuk, one verse that is quoted in the Torah when it discusses the actual incense offering, the Ketoret. And there's another Pasuk, another verse that's mentioned on Yom Kippur, when we go into the Holy of Holies. Also there it mentions the Ketoret, the incense offering. And the answer will be in these 2 Psukim. In the Pasuk, in the verse in the Ketoret itself, which is in Shmot Perek Lamed, so it's in Shmot, the 30th Perek, it says over there, V'shachakta mimena hadek, that you must grind it up very finely. The Ketoret was ground up. It was made up of 11 different spices, and there were some additional small things that were added to it. And I'm going to hopefully discuss that soon. As a side note, the Ketoret is a huge topic, and at some point we'll do even more. We'll discuss even more of it. But it says here, V'shachakta mimena hadek, you have to grind it up very finely. And so a daily offering, they took all these different spices, they put them together, and they ground them up in a grinder, a special kind of grinder. And on Yom Kippur it says, same idea, that he has to take melo chafna ketaret, he has to take a handful of the ketaret like this, and he has to bring that before God. And there it says once again, ketoret samim daka, that the ketoret samim, the incense, has to also be fine. Now the Gemara, the Talmud, asks the obvious question. We already knew from the verse in Shmot that it had to, in Exodus, that the Ketoret had to be finely ground. Why then does the Torah in Vayikra, Leviticus, in the 16th chapter, have to repeat that the Ketoret Samim was daka, was also ground? And I'll quote you the Gemara. The Gemara is actually in Yuma, which is the Gemara all about the Beit HaMikdash on the Avodat, the service of the Beit HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. And it's on the 45th page. And it actually says like this, B'chol yom hayta daka, every day it was ground finely. V'hayom daka mina daka, it was actually ground even more fine. They did it again. They brought it back to the grinder Erev Yom Kippur, right on the evening before Yom Kippur, and they ground it again to make sure it was very, very, very fine. And here it goes, Tanu Rabbanan, this is a Braita, it's like a Mishnah, but it's an outside Braita. Dakama tamalomar. Why did the Torah repeat in Vayikra that it has to say, that has to be ground finely? We already learned in Shemot that it had to be finely ground. Ella lavi daka minadaka tells you that it has to be very, very finely ground when it goes into the Holy of Holies. And why is that, right? Why is God requesting us to do that? So I want to quote you another Gemara that's in Kritut. The area where all the halachot of the Ketoret, for the most part, are found outside of Yuma is also another tractate called Kritut. And there in Kritut, they say a beautiful thing. One of the ingredients of the Ketoret was called chelbana. Chelbana in English, I will tell you the word in English, is galbanum, for those that know what galbanum is. So that's the English word, and I guess it's also the Latin word for it. And it didn't smell nice, and it was one of the 11 ingredients of the Ketoret. Very odd that they would put something that didn't smell nice, and you're bringing it into a holy place on a daily basis in the Holy of Holies. But the process of it was such that when they took this galbanum, the chelbana, and they grind it up together, and they put it together with the 10 other spices that were there, what would happen was that the actual galbanum, the chelbana, actually smelled really nice. It actually made it even a more powerful, nice smell that came out of the Ketoret, out of the incense offering. Now, the Gemara actually in Kritut says something really beautiful that I want to share with you about this particular spice, about the galbanum, the chelbana. And it says like this, and it's in Kritut on the 6th page. It's a worthwhile read because it's all about the Ketoret. It tells you all the ingredients and how it worked. And it goes like this. Amar Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. So one rabbi says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Chasida, Kol ta'anit she'en ba miposhe Yisrael eno ta'anit. He explains that any fast that doesn't include sinners is not a real fast. When you're going to fast to get repentance, bad things have happened to the Jewish people and they're fasting. For whatever reason we're fasting, Yom Kippur we're fasting. If it doesn't include sinners, it's not a real fast. You can't just have a fast from the good people. And it gives an example from the Ketoret. Because chelbana, the galbanum, has a bad smell to it. And yet, umana katuv im sammenei haketoret. And yet the Torah included it as one of the spices, one of the ingredients of the Ketoret. And interesting about this chelbana is that it's one of the 4 ingredients that was actually mentioned in the Bible in Exodus. So there's 11 ingredients, but this one was actually mentioned in Exodus 2. And so let's go back to the daka mina daka, the finely ground spices on Yom Kippur. And let's take the same idea that we saw here, that we saw in the Gemara. You need to have sinners with the rest of the Jewish people. Why? And it's very simple. Because they too, like that chelbana, they too are part of the group. They're part of Am Yisrael. They're part of the Jewish people. We can't exclude them because all of Am Yisrael is one. As it says, Umi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz, who is like you, Yisrael, one nation in the land. We're all echad, just like God is echad. In fact, that pasuk, the Gemara says, is in God's tefillin. God carries that pasuk in his tefillin. So we're all one. If we don't include the sinners, then we're not one. And it's the same idea of being finely ground incense. We make it really, really fine so that we can't distinguish between one grain and another grain. When we bring this offering before God on Yom Kippur, we don't want to distinguish between one Jew and another. We don't want to distinguish between them. We're Am Echad, we're one people coming before God in the Holy of Holies, which is our connecting point. It's the portal, if you will, to the spiritual world, to God's Shekhinah. And when we go before God on Yom Kippur, we better make sure that we're Am Echad, we're one people, asking for tshuva and mechila, that God forgive us on Yom Kippur as an Am Echad as well. And I think that's a very good explanation of what we have to understand is a good explanation of the Ketoret itself, what it's coming to do. It's representing the Jewish people, it's representing us. And it's bringing that connection to God on the holy day of the year. Now, one of the things about the Ketoret that's very interesting is it's all about smell. And it's a very interesting idea, right? It's something that the main korban, the offering that we bring in the Holy of Holies, the main offering is smell related. And let me give you an idea how potent the smell of the Ketoret was in the time of the Mikdash, the time of the temple. And of course, I'm going to quote you another Mishnah. And it was so potent, the smell of these 11 spices, that the distances they traveled were far. And let me quote you the Masechet Tamid. Tamid is all about the daily offering on in the Beit HaMikdash. It's in the 3rd parak in the 8th Mishnah. And it goes like this, that from Yericho, they would smell the smell of the Ketoret. Could you imagine? Yericho is pretty far away. I don't know how many miles away it is. I didn't calculate it, but I should put on Waze to see how far away it is. But it's quite far from the old city. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Nigloi. And then this person named Rabbi Elazar ben Nigloi. It's the only time he's quoted in the entire Talmud. And he says, Izim hayu lebeit Abba bahar michvar. I had goats. My father had goats in this place called Har Michvar. And the commentaries argue, some say that it was as far as the other side of the Jordan River. That's where Beit Michvar was. And listen to this, it's quite interesting. They would sneeze. His goats would sneeze from the reich of the Ketoret. I'm sure there's a deeper meaning to that. But it gives you an idea of the power of smell. And the power of smell is very, very strong power. So again, we go back to the question here is, why was the one ingredient brought into the Holy of Holies connected to smell? And the answer to that is something even more interesting. And when I heard this answer, it just so resonated with me. It made so much sense. And I want to share that with you. Is that when Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, when they were in the Garden of Eden, in Gan Eden, and Chava brought the fruit from the Eitz Hadat, brought the fruit from the tree of knowledge to Adam, and they both ate it. 4 out of their 5 senses they used. There was one sense that they didn't use when they sinned. And I'm sure you now know what that is, and that is the sense of smell. They didn't sin with the sense of smell. So the sense of smell essentially was retained, that sort of spiritual sense of smell that they had in the Garden of Eden was retained even when they left the Garden of Eden. It was the only sense that they retained that still connected them back to the Garden of Eden, to Gan Eden. And now that makes a lot of sense. Why Dafka? Why, as we say, Dafka? Why it is that way? Why we bring the Ketoret in the Holy of Holies? Because on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, we want to connect back to Gan Eden, to that point where we were pre-sin. How do we connect back to the point of pre-sin? Is only through our sense of smell, because that's the one that wasn't tainted in Gan Eden. And therefore the Ketoret becomes this almost incredibly important offering for the Jewish people, because it's our one way to connect back to that portal and get back into the source and bring us the mechila, the forgiveness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God. And I actually want to quote another Gemara here, okay? And it's in Brachot on the 43rd page. And it goes like this, and you'll understand also the point here of the Ketoret, how important it is for our souls. Amrav Zutra ben Tuvia Amarav. Zutra ben Tuvia said in the name of Rav. Rav was one of the greatest of the Amoraim, of the Gemara teachers, and he was first generation Babylonian teachers. How do we know that we make a bracha on smell? It's not something that is so obvious. Shneemar, because it says in a pasuk, it's the last verse in Psalms. Kol haneshama talelka. Every soul should bless God. What does that have to do with smell? And the Gemara explains, Ezehu davar shehaneshama nenet mimena. What is the one thing that the soul really benefits from? And the guf, the body, gets nothing from it. Havi omer zereach, it's smell. The smell is our conduit to our soul. It's the way of reaching the soul. When that Ketoret goes into the Holy of Holies, it's connecting to every soul out there. That smell is connecting to every soul that's out there and bringing it back to its creator, to God. That's a pretty incredible idea in terms of the Ketoret. And we want to remain, and we want to actually remember that smell forever. By the way, just as a side note on this idea, is there's a person in Israel, his name is Avram Sand, and he's actually written a book. He's an aromatherapist. He's actually one of the top aromatherapists, from my understanding, in the world. And he's actually written a book that's on aromatherapy. He's an Orthodox Jew, learned Jew, and he's actually published this book. As you can see on the front cover is the Kohen Gadol. It's the high priest going into the Holy of Holies. And it's a wonderful book to read if you want to get more understanding in English of the various aspects of the Ketoret. In Hebrew, of course, you can look at any of the Mechon HaMikdash Temple Institute books in Hebrew. Okay. So I want to just go back, reiterate that the Ketoret is our connector. It connects us to God, connects us to Gan Eden. And in fact, the words Ketoret, the word Ketoret is an odd word. What does it mean? So in Aramaic, it can actually mean a knot, or it can mean smoke. And both are applicable here. The Ketoret is the knot, or the binding, that connects us to God, to Gan Eden. Or it can be the smoke, because when the Kohen Gadol went into the Holy of Holies, when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, he adds an ingredient called Ma'aleh Ashan. It was this one little thing called Ma'aleh Ashan. They're not sure what that ingredient is today. They seem to have narrowed it down to two different possibilities, but for the most part, we're not sure. But what it did was, it caused the smoke of the Ketoret to shoot up, almost in a straight line, almost symbolizing the connection of this physical world to the spiritual world above, which is a pretty incredible idea. And the idea being is that on Yom Kippur, in the place where the world was created, we are connecting from this world to the spiritual realm of the Shekhinah. And the Ketoret is such a holy prayer, in addition to the service itself, that it's actually, everyone says it. I mean, not everyone, but most people say it on a daily basis. And the Zohar actually suggests that one say it on a daily basis, because it brings this protective layer, this protective coating to those that actually say it. And let me quote you some of the Zohars. I won't go into the Hebrew here, I'll just quote you the English Zohars, but there's so many of them that relate to the Ketoret itself. The Ketoret says, the Zohar says that the Ketoret breaks the Yetzer Hara. That's pretty incredible. It breaks the will to sin. That's how incredible the Ketoret is. So imagine when the Kohen Gadol is bringing this Ketoret in the Holy of Holies, he's breaking that Yetzer Hara out there. He's breaking the will to sin. He's paving the way for us to receive mechila, forgiveness from God. But also, he's breaking that Yetzer Hara. It also says that the Ketoret protects you from harm by saying it. And it says the Arizal was one of the great Kabbalistic masters of the 1500s. And the Arizal actually has a specific kind of Ketoret prayer. He adds in various other prayers to it, parts from Psalms and other verses. And when he says the Jewish people are in trouble, they should say this song, they should say this particular Ketoret. And what happened was in 1940s, when Hitler started to bomb Israel, the Jews in Israel were very scared, because imagine if Hitler took over Israel. And there were rabbanim, rabbis, who went to the four corners of Israel, meaning east, west, north, and south. And they said this special prayer of the Arizal, the Ketoret prayer. And could be, bizchut, on the merit of these prayers, that the Jewish people were saved. But the point being is that they saw a need to do something, and the prayer they chose to use, to say, was the actual Ketoret prayer. And that in itself says a lot. And here's another thing, and I'll end with this. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is, as you know, the one they attribute him to the author, to being the author of the Zohar, he says this: if you only knew, and I'm translating, if you only knew the power of the Ketoret before God, the power that the Ketoret yields before a Kadosh Baruch Hu, before God, you would fashion a hat made of its words and wear it on your head, just like a golden crown. Those are the holy words of the Ketoret. May the power of the Ketoret protect everybody. And all of Am Yisrael, may we have a year of mechila, of God forgiving us on all our sins, which will set us up to a year free of sins. A year that we can keep accomplishing more and more greatness in the holy land of Eretz Yisrael. Thank you very much. Have a great year.